post-World War II landscape was one of extreme political and ideological divisions. Not only were there irreconcilable differences between Western and Soviet notions of history, individual liberty, and modes of governance, but these issues were exacerbated by the proxy wars fought throughout the duration of the Cold War. Korea and Vietnam exemplified the ideological split and ravaged local communities for the sake of worldwide power struggles. However, nowhere was this split more evident, egregious, and gross than in the case of the Berlin Wall. It was a literal embodiment of the divide between East and West, communism and capitalism, totalitarianism and democracy.
The German Senate Chancellery claims the construction of the Berlin Wall, that between 1949 and 1961, around 2.7 million people left the Soviet zone and East Berlin. This represents the extent to which life in East Berlin, under an enforced communist system, was becoming intolerable. These numbers indicate that when Berliners were forced to choose between burgeoning West Germany and increasingly impoverished East Germany, the choice was obvious.
Migration itself did more to cement the differences in prosperity between East and West. The East Germans that had left by 1961 totaled approximately 20% of the entire East German population. Frank W. Thackeray, in his book Events That Changed Germany, claims that out of this 20%, many were young and educated people. This caused fears of brain drain, which encouraged strengthening of the borders between East and West Germany even further. The more the inner German borders were strengthened, the more the immigration numbers swelled, from 144,000 in the year 1949 to 199,000 in 1960, and 207,000 in the first 7 months of 1961 alone.
In June 1961, the GDR head of state Walter Ulbricht declared that he had no intention of building a wall. Yet by August, construction began on the first temporary barriers that would eventually become the wall. Houses that were on the border were actually split and integrated into the border fortifications, with some having no ground floor entrance anymore and only being accessible through courtyards. On August 13th, governing mayor Willy Brandt of West Germany spoke out against the wall. On October 25th, American and Soviet tanks faced off at the Friedrichstrasse border crossing, which was used for foreign officials. GDR guards had tried to check their authentication, angering those who felt that they had transport access to all of Berlin. In the end, Kennedy and Khrushchev managed to end this with diplomacy, but the wall would stand regardless. It would continue to expand for years. At the height of its development, the true wall was 43 kilometers long, and its less heavy fortifications stretched 112 kilometers in length.
Willard A. Heaps, in his book The Wall of Shame, states that the immoral feature of the sealing up of East Berlin was the callous disregard for the rupture it caused in the lives of the residents. It was not only a political or ideological divide, but a personal one. Acts of sentiment, such as waving over the wall at loved ones, were punished with tear gas grenades and worse demonstrations of violence. It seems as though sentiment and familial emotions themselves were considered criminal. Being human was intolerable under the oppressive shadow of the wall.
Not only were East Berliners subject to extremely poor living conditions that prompted them to risk their lives in an attempt to cross the wall, but some of the rules and regulations in place were nothing less than inhumane. For example, East Berliners were refused permission to visit their families' graves in East Berlin, and promulgation of much literature, such as Orwell's Animal Farm, was prohibited.
As fortifications along the border escalated and barbed wire was replaced by high walls and machine gun outposts, people became increasingly desperate to cross. Some residents along the wall's construction route jumped into fire nets and mattresses, while others were not so lucky and fell several stories to their deaths. Families often ran together across a 110-yard death strip, dodging machine gun fire as they ran.
In John Rodden's book, The Walls That Remain, he interviews a man by the name of Bernd Lippmann to demonstrate the harsh sociological effects that the wall established, primarily on the East German side. With the division between the United States and the Soviet Union, room was left for the Soviets to enforce hidden agendas and harsh regimes due to the lack of transparency to the rest of the world. Bernd Lippmann was put into a Stasi jail for distributing books and magazines that the Soviet Union labeled as forbidden literature. He describes the horrors that went on behind closed doors of Stasi jail as including torture techniques such as waterboarding and psychological torment in addition to grim living conditions.
When Gorbachev became the leader of the Soviet Union, he was met with a country that had been in slow decline for more than a decade. With no other method available to save the country, Gorbachev set his new plan into motion, glasnost, or openness. By weakening the ideology behind the wall, glasnost also spelled doom for the wall itself. This was accentuated by President Ronald Reagan, who was waging a no-holds-barred war on the Soviet Union's ideology.
In November 1989, East Germany faced mounting pressure. Gorbachev's Soviet Union could not afford to prop them up anymore. On November 9th, a minister admitted that the East Germans were no longer bearing transport across the wall. Thousands mobbed to leave the country, and the wall was no longer necessary. Though the wall would stand physically for a few more years, not being completely destroyed until 1992, the wall within people's minds lost some of its power that day.